Denmark's radio, the Danish national public broadcaster, claimed, citing 8 sources in the Danish security services and elsewhere in the government, that at least 3 American citizens with unspecified connections to Trump or to the White House had been in Greenland in recent months, trying to mobilize a separatist campaign in favor of leaving Denmark and ultimately joining the United States. And it also said that it was still unclear whether these were individuals acting at the behest of the White House or whether they were acting on their own initiative.
Oliver Moody, the Times' Berlin correspondent and author of Baltic, The Future of Europe. Thanks for joining The World in 10. Now, this story first emerged from the Danish national broadcaster, which reports that US citizens somehow connected to the White House had infiltrated Greenland to conduct what it calls covert influence operations. Now, do we know who these individuals are? Is it a CIA operation? Is it more of a political MAGA-driven campaign? And what were they trying to achieve?
Yeah, good morning and lovely to be with you for what I think is the final episode of the podcast. Yes, that's exactly right. Denmark's radio, the Danish national public broadcaster, claimed, citing 8 sources in the Danish security services and elsewhere in the government, that at least 3 American citizens with unspecified connections to Trump or to the White House had been in Greenland in recent months, trying to mobilize a separatist campaign in favor of leaving Denmark and ultimately joining the United States. And it also said that it was still unclear whether these were individuals acting at the behest of the White House or whether they were acting on their own initiative. And I think that is a very important point, because we know that Trump likes to operate through brokers and middlemen, the classic example being Steve Witkoff, who has now got a kind of formal diplomatic position, but was fundamentally drawn out of the business world. So it is not clear at all to what extent this is a deliberate action from the White House, or to what extent it is almost a kind of Russian-style act of entrepreneurial agitation.
And in particular, it appears to be they were stirring up resentment or using this particularly horrific historical scandal as a way of stirring that resentment and potential desire for separation.
That's right. So from the 1960s, certainly until the late 1970s, but allegedly right the way through until the first half of the last decade, at least 4,700 Greenlandic women were implanted with contraceptive coils, IUDs, very often without their consent and often without their knowledge, which has been a very significant source of tension between public opinion in Greenland and the government in Copenhagen. And the Denmark's radio report did claim that this was one of the issues around which these alleged agents had been trying to stir up some sort of campaign.
And have the Danish security services responded publicly? Do we know if these individuals are still in the country, and if so, could they be expelled, or would that risk an escalation in tensions, as ridiculous as that sounds, between Denmark and the US?
One thing that a source in the Danish security establishment did tell DR was that the level of activity had actually diminished over the course of the summer. So it might not be the case that we are talking about a group of people who are permanently in situ in Nuuk or other parts of Greenland. It might be that they are visiting on a kind of irregular basis. And the source said, quite interestingly, it wasn't clear whether it was a positive sign that things had got quieter in the last few months, that it might be the calm before the storm. And it was plausible that this was the stage where American government institutions were starting to get involved, and they were able to do a better job of concealing their activities.
And so zooming out for a minute, Ollie, why is Greenland of such strategic importance to the US? Is it to do with its proximity to the Arctic and access to minerals and shipping routes? Or is it important militarily to monitor Russian activity? Why has Trump put so much political capital into this?
There are basically three reasons, and you've already hit two of them right on the head. So the first is the enormous reserves of rare earth metals and other strategically essential minerals that are believed to be in Greenland, probably the largest complex on the planet. This is a sector of the global economy over which China has a stranglehold, which it has been exerting very vigorously in response to American tariffs in the past few months. And Trump is very obviously and explicitly keen on getting a share of those. The next one is military. If you look at the flight path from Russia's nuclear missile silos to the North American mainland, it goes pretty much directly over Greenland. And that is exactly the reason why the US maintains a kind of space observation base in the north of Greenland, formerly known as the Thule Air Base, which J.D. Vance visited a few weeks ago. And recently, the US actually added Greenland to its homeland defense command, very much signaling that it is perceived as being an integral part of their national defense. And the third reason is kind of ideological. If you think about the evolution of the United States territory and national identity over the course of the 19th century as it spread upwards towards Canada, the whole concept of manifest destiny. Greenland, which is closer to the east coast of the United States than it is to Denmark, has been seen as a natural part of that sphere since at least as far back as the 1860s. And for some reason that no one I talked to has ever been able to quite explain, Trump is absolutely fixated on this period of American history as a kind of golden era. And I think it is totally plausible that there is a kind of ideological drive and a sense of restoring this age of American greatness, and that Denmark would be a part of that.
Well, then, how do Greenlanders feel about their state of sovereignty, their relationship with Denmark, and the prospect of being absorbed into the US? Have there been any polls on it? And would they perhaps hold a referendum a bit like in the Falklands as a tool of diplomacy to show that they have no interest in being a US territory?
The polling and the results of Greenlandic elections, including one earlier this year, strongly indicate that there is a big majority of the Greenlandic public that is in favour of independence from Denmark, but not now. That they regard that as a kind of medium-term project, historically for economic reasons, because the block grants from Copenhagen have been so essential to propping up the Greenlandic state. And they would want to have a stronger economic footing before they sought independence, but also now because it would leave them so vulnerable to some kind of hostile takeover attempt from the United States. And there was a poll conducted just after Trump's return to the White House in January that found 85% of the Greenlanders who were surveyed opposed being incorporated into the US. So as far as we can tell, it looks like the public sentiment in Greenland is pretty clear that ultimately they want to be part of neither Denmark nor the United States.
And taking that into account, does the government in Copenhagen and the territory itself feel particularly vulnerable to foreign interference, whether that be American, whether it be Russian or any other country operating in the Arctic, because of its relative geographical isolation? I mean, Denmark is a long way away.
That's correct, and there is a kind of prehistory to this because in the past, Chinese mining companies have expressed a very strong interest in Greenland's mineral assets, even to the point of kind of moving towards memoranda of understanding for exploiting them. So there have been long-standing anxieties of influence with reference to China as well as the United States. And Denmark's relationship with Greenland has, for reasons we've discussed earlier in the podcast, been very difficult at many times in recent years. And Mette Frederiksen, the Danish Prime Minister, has made a real effort to try and bind them closer together and to be a lot more sympathetic towards the Greenlanders. And on Wednesday, after it emerged that this issue of the contraceptive coils had been part of the alleged campaign, she actually issued an apology on behalf of the Danish state for the scandal. So she's doing her level best to win around hearts and minds in Greenland.
I suppose the idea of shady figures close to the president stirring up separatist movements all feels a bit like shadowy CIA missions that you would hear about in the 1960s in South America. But should we really be surprised that US intelligence in some capacity is operating in somewhere like Greenland? Because of its strategic importance in the way that you've already set out, that could really be happening under any president from any party.
I'm pleased you said that, because I was talking to a diplomat from another European country about this just yesterday, and that was exactly the comparison that they drew. They said it was like some sort of CIA-sponsored coup in South America in the 1960s, and there clearly has been a sort of certain institutional heritage in parts of the American intelligence establishment, or at least if this is sponsored by the White House, it is founded on a sense that it hasn't completely come out of the blue. We don't know very much about the extent of US espionage or covert operations in allied countries since the NSA scandal that was exposed by Edward Snowden in the early 2010s. It's been an extremely sensitive topic, and I think they've had to certainly tread a little more softly in recent years than they did before. But it remains very much a kind of closed book to us.
And finally, Oliver, we've heard from a US State Department official overnight who's told the Danes to calm down. Those were his words. Will Denmark be calmed by that statement? And have we had any other details from Washington? And what can we expect to see next?
We have had very little detail from Washington. The official comment from the State Department has been that they are not going to talk about the private activities of any American citizens, and that they respect the kind of independent will of the Greenlanders to forge their own destiny. On the Danish side, I think it has added to a general sense of concern that Trump is very, very serious about this and highly resistant to Denmark's very generous and conciliatory offers to give the US pretty much any kind of concession short of a territorial one over Denmark. But also the fact that the Danes have very publicly made such a big meal out of this suggests a certain confidence, I think, paradoxically, that they can afford to stand up to Trump over this issue. I think if they were really existentially rattled by this sort of activity, we wouldn't be hearing about it right now.
Oliver Moody, the Times' Berlin correspondent and author of Baltic, The Future of Europe. Thank you very much for joining The World in 10.
Thank you very much.